Greetings from the heartland of Omaha, Nebraska, and TomBecka.com, where everyone is exceptional and everyone has a story to tell. And I got an email this past week from somebody, kind of a nasty email, saying, not everybody is exceptional. Some people are low lives, some people are below average. Not everyone is exceptional. Quit saying everyone is exceptional. Well, hey there, Mr. Sunshine. Everyone, okay, maybe not everyone is exceptional, but everyone somewhere has an exceptional story to tell. And that's what we focus with here on TomBecka.com. Trying to find some people with at least exceptional stories to tell, even if they're below average. Are you satisfied now, Mr. Sunshine? This interview here, though, is a man that is exceptional. I think, at least, Watie White is an artist. He's a conceptual artist. He's more than just an artist or a person that does paintings or sculpture and tries to get them in galleries or sell them to rich investors. This man actually does his art to also not only for that, but also to try to make neighborhoods better and to try to improve people's lives. Yeah, he actually paints houses, but not in the way that you think about painting houses. No. It's a fascinating story, and we're getting to it right now here on TomBecka.com. But I start off by asking a very basic question. Just, what is an artist?
I kind of ascribe to letting everybody be an artist. Like, I don't really see that much difference in cooking than painting or singing, or they like making something touches on the same sort of impulse and the same reward that others do. And the much more interesting question to me is what are you doing to be a good artist, or what makes you better than you were before, than you were previously?
Well, okay, no, you mean like when you say everybody's an artist at some extent? I mean, I know Subway, did a thing where they were, the people working behind the counter were sandwich artists.
Yeah, I know. And like, I think that the sandwich is probably a limited medium in the art world, and I think that's sort of more to it. Like, it seems arbitrary to draw lines and say that some people aren't artists because what they are creating is, I don't know, just sort of made out of something other than what I would make it out of. But it also, there are some art is great, and some art like changes your life when you experience it, and some art is a decent meal. It was nice, and there are really bad. I mean, there are painters who are just as poor of artists as people making sandwiches, and I think that it's more a question of what makes it powerful. I would like to believe there's a sandwich out there that could blow my mind and change my life, but I haven't had it yet.
Well, and really, once you have, then what's the point of living anymore?
I know. Well, maybe you can move on to soups or something.
But it's interesting you say that. I hadn't thought in this perspective, but I was in sales for a number of years, and I also did stand-up comedy for a number of years, and I noticed that the same techniques I used in stand-up were the same techniques I used in sales. And I wrote a book called "There's No Business Without the Show" to show people how to use show business techniques in sales, because it really is an art form.
Okay.
It's about communicating your ideas to people,
right? And
whether you're doing it to a bunch of drunks in a nightclub, or you're doing it to a family selling insurance, you've still got to get that idea across. And there is an art to that.
Yeah, there is. And I think that you also, when you take something out of being strictly utilitarian and it becomes functional as well as sort of philosophical, I think that's where it starts to kind of cross over and become something greater than it was.
Okay, so then I guess the question then I should have started off by asking then is, what kind of artist are you then?
Well, I'm a person who's actually on the edges of a lot of things. So labels are really hard because I know none of them really stick very well. I had a professor from Lincoln. I did not go to Lincoln, but I met him through an event thing. And he wanted to call me a conceptual realist, which sounds good enough that I would go with it.
This isn't NPR. We don't use words like
that.
Here,
I know, it's big. It's like, what the heck does that mean?
Yeah.
But I use a lot of different mediums. So the stuff I make is two-dimensional, largely. It's narrative. It's figurative. It's recognizable. People can understand what they're looking at. There's a way in. You don't have to know a whole lot about art in order to look at it and start to understand it on a kind of a human level, on your own level, I would hope. But it's also not super literal, right? Like, so it tells you a story, but the story isn't a very tight story. It allows you. There's a lot of gaps in there, so that your brain will naturally start to fill those in, and the story will make sense to you. And it'll be a slightly different story than what it would be to me or to anybody else looking at it.
Okay, so I mean, yeah, and I guess maybe I'm just trying to categorize everything here. So what you're saying, in effect, is that you use a lot of different mediums to tell a story, and whatever mediums you need to tell that story, that becomes you the conceptual realist.
Yeah, kind of. Like it's realist in the sense that the people and stories that I want to talk about or want to tell about are not grand people. They're very humble. They're very sort of salt of the earth, very ordinary people with ordinary stories. And when I look at their ordinary stories, I see the same like grand, like big mythological stories that people have been telling each other for thousands of years.
So what you're basically telling me is that you're broke all the time.
Kind of, yeah. I'm always finding some way to make a project that sounds like a really good idea, and then only later it's like, oh, I got to figure out how to make this pay for itself.
Because you do have to keep body and soul together, right? Body and spirit together. I mean, how do you, so what do you do then to sell this art?
How do I keep it going?
Yeah.
Well, most artists that I know, they sort of support themselves by finding as many little trickles of income as possible. So they teach some, they sell some individual things, they do some contract work, they use whatever skills they have. I taught for a long time. I taught when I lived in Chicago at DePaul University. I taught at UNO when I was here. I raised some money through grants, especially the larger public projects that I've been doing. Those are largely grant funded. I sell individual artworks. I sell them. I show a lot in Chicago. I sell them here. I do commissions. And for the first time, I'm doing a crowdsourcing campaign for the current project that I'm doing with Habitat for Humanity.
I want to talk about that a little bit, okay? But I want to get to a little bit about who you are first before we get to that.
Sure.
Because that's how you and I became, or how I became aware of you, at least, was through this Habitat for Humanity project that you're working on. But as a person that, I mean, obviously, I'm guessing at least you were always into art as a young child. You don't just all about it just say,
no.
Well, I'm going to college now. I think I'll be an artist, right?
Right.
Yeah. So you always figured you'd be doing something like this?
Yeah, kind of. There was only ever a couple things that I really liked. I liked girls. I liked football. I liked art. That was pretty much it. And then growing, through high school, through college, I did as much of that as possible. And then eventually, we
all did as many girls in college as possible.
Actually, I had a really unsuccessful.
It was right there. I'm sorry, I had to take it.
I had a very unsuccessful girl career. But it was always there. And I think with a lot of artists, they always have made stuff, and they didn't stop at the time that everyone else stopped. So that's kind of what it was for me.
So then, okay, so you're in college and all this. Now all of a sudden, it's time to.
Now,
mom and dad. Did mom and dad say, "Okay, it was nice in college, nice and all that, but now it's time to grow up. You got to get a job."
Well, I was always a little more. I was a pretty independent kid, so I paid for my own way in college through a lot of it. There was no real option to move home that I was interested in taking, at least. My parents lived a pretty non-traditional life. They were cultural anthropologists, lived way out in the country in southern Illinois. So they probably saw me as a lot of the square of the family anyway, because I was going to have a car that ran. I was going to have a decent job. So after I graduated from college,
just like all kids, you rebelled against your parents
a little bit. I rebel against them and be the suit who becomes an artist. I went into advertising for a few years, and I thought that would be a way that I could, do something creative. I could make something, and it could actually pay me. And I was in-house advertising or marketing, I guess, for Cub Foods for 3 years, and it was pretty boring. It was the most exciting thing about it was that I could work a lot because I also have that kind of ingrained in me that I like to make a lot of stuff, work really hard. And I could do a lot, but that was the only thrill or the only challenge of it was how much you could do.
And so you did that for 3 years, finally said, I'm tired of the corporate world. Yeah. And now, were you doing a lot of art on the side then? I mean, you would do your job and then go home and create stuff? I
kind of wanted to, but I didn't. Basically, I took 3 years after college, where I started journaling in coffee shops and being that sort of introspective guy in the corner who's milking one cup of coffee for 3 hours.
Hoping to meet girls.
Yes. Unsuccessfully yet again. And then I met a girl who was moving to Chicago and asked me to move with her, and also kind of challenged me to stop complaining and see what would happen if I started making art again and see what that would be like.
Very cool. So you're in Chicago now.
Yep.
And start doing art.
Yep.
Like how old are you about this time?
I'm 3 years out of college. So I'm 24, 25.
Yeah. Okay, so you're out there, and that's got to be a little bit scary, right?
A little bit, although it didn't seem intimidating or scary really. Like the idea of jumping in. I grew up. I grew up really poor. I grew up in poverty with not much to wear, not much food. We learned to hunt so that we could have food. I remember when my family got on public assistance, and there was a real a great leap in our standard of living when that happened. And then I went off to college, and I went to a really academic school. A school that it seemed like every other kid was a lot more affluent than me. And the standard of living that I had just from, the crappy job you get the first year out of college, was a really great standard of living for me. Like I thought I was really good. I could have all the ramen I wanted to eat. I could milk that cup of coffee for, a few hours. So the idea of failing at doing this thing that I knew I loved, was not really a fear. The fear was really that I would never be able to figure out how to do it. That I could, I'd had the experience that most artists have, where you've gone and you've seen something that really deeply moved you, and you say to yourself in some way that it'd be a worthwhile life to do that once, to make that thing that was so moving, and how you do that, you have no idea. And so you just pursue this thing that's kind of a ghost.
You make it sound as if maybe you with your upbringing and everything, and you said that like moving back home wasn't an option and all, that maybe you were a little bit detached from your parents at the time.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, so was there a mentor in all of this, or was this just something you wanted to do on your own?
Well, I think I've been really lucky. I've had a string of really great mentors. As an undergrad, there was a guy named Fred Hagstrom, who was a printmaker, who I started learning under him. I had coaches who took me under their wing, and really supported me a lot. In art school, I met 2 or 3 artists who really kind of pushed me to learn what all I could learn. I think they in me, what they saw was somebody who was older than other students there, was a lot more serious than a lot of the students there, was going to work really hard, and was smart, and had a different kind of schooling. I came to art school with a lot of with a pretty rigorous academic background, and I was going to work really hard, and I was really pursuing this thing that they were also still pursuing at 30 years older than me. So I had a string of people, both as an undergrad in art school and in graduate school, who really kind of pushed me forward.
Okay, so now you're in Chicago with this girl. Was she an artist also?
She was not. She was a school teacher.
A school teacher.
Yeah.
Okay, school teacher, and so you're there. You're living, pursuing your art dream, and she's teaching school, and you're living there.
Yep, it was pretty nice.
And how did things start going then for you, where you started to really realize, like, hey, maybe this is really who I was meant to be and what I was meant to do?
I think that question has always been sort of floating. Like, it's been hard to know that something was, meant to be. So I would make a lot of work. That was one of the things that one of my mentors, this guy named Marian Kritschka, who was a very, it was really funny. Like my understanding of what professional artists were like was, a very kind of effeminate or highfalutin or, too conceptual.
And stoned all the time.
Yes, definitely. And he was a Polish immigrant fisherman, always having a cigar, flat top, cursing a blue streak, like through the classes where he's just teaching you how to mix paint. And so it's like, make your alizarin crimson. And it was both hilarious and incredibly instructive. And one of the things that he really pushed into my head was that there isn't any way to learn things for real other than to do them, than to work your way through to that understanding. So if I was going to be an artist, if I was interested in being a painter specifically, I had to make 500 paintings as quickly as I could so that I could understand what I'm supposed to be painting, why I'm supposed to be painting, and how the heck I would actually do it. So that, because you would have to make all those terrible paintings to figure out what not to do.
So what you're talking about is the same thing that I did when I was doing stand-up comedy.
Yeah.
Because it's like, okay, you've got to do a lot of jokes to find out what your point of view is, what your voice is, and your style. Yeah. You've got to find out, and that just comes from trial and error.
Right. There's no way to, I don't really think there's a way to think your way through a lot of this stuff. Like you have to taste the food to see if it's right or not. And if it's not, then you've tasted bad food, but then you're wiser of it and you know what to do next.
And you learn from your mistakes more than you learn from your successes.
Right.
Okay, so you're doing like 500 paintings a day, and you okay. Now this is actually, I always wondered about this because I've seen these ads, especially around the first of the year on TV, where there's always a starving artist art sale at the Holiday Inn.
God.
Okay,
yeah.
Are these the paintings that guys like you are doing when you're just starting out, trying to get your?
No, those I think they have a room full of people with basically like stencils and paint, and it's take a roller out of the yellow bucket and roll it this way, and then you have some triangle shaped mountains, and then things like that. Those things are pretty difficult for me to look at. So what I was doing was I was basically doing plein air landscape painting at the time to figure it out. And to me, I was making little abstract compositions basically, but they were realistic looking and they looked like the parks in Chicago. And so I would pack up all my paints. I would go out into the parks. I would look at stuff. I would find what the painting was going to be from what I could see. And then I would have about 3 hours to make it. And so I'm painting as fast as I can. I can't overthink anything. I have to find the narrative, find the structure, find something that's compelling enough to make it a good painting, and figure out how to do it all in the span of three or so hours, because the sun is going to move and all the colors are going to be different, all the shadows are going to be different. Everything will it'll be a different painting.
So do you need that though? In other words, how much of what when you're painting, especially if you're doing a landscape or something like that, and you see all the light and the light has to be the same and all that for the colors, how much of that is actually painting what you're seeing and painting what you're seeing in your mind? In other words, the light's bad now, so I can't do the same shade. Well, isn't it really what you're seeing in your mind more so than what you're seeing?
A lot of what I was. Obviously, there's people are compelled and interested to follow different kind of paths of what they're trying to figure out, I think. And for me, what I was really trying to figure out, it turns out, was how to understand what it was I was seeing. And so if I look at something, and I was hoping to look at things and see them for what they are and not just for what I'm, the world is a really kind of subjective place. Like you can look at things and they shift around all the time. Knowing what they are makes it really hard to actually see it for what it is, which is it's sort of a weird issue you come up against all the time when you're trying to draw something in front of you or draw a person and get a likeness. Yeah. And so that was the thing that I was really fascinated by, was this thing that was hitting me every day of, I don't know the thing that's right in front of me. I don't understand this, I don't even understand what it is I'm looking at, because I am so certain on some level of what it is already.
Okay. So now you're doing this. Now let's talk about the project that I first became aware of you and your work.
Yeah.
You're doing an interesting thing with Habitat for Humanity.
Yeah.
Explain what it is.
So I did a pilot last year where, let me back this up a couple of years. I moved to Omaha in 2006, and I started getting opportunities to do projects in public, and they would be murals, or they'd be things that I hadn't done before. I got to do an opera with Opera Omaha, and a lot of times it would just sort of get tossed in my lap. Someone would be asking me for something, and they'd be asking me for one of those starving artist paintings of a tree on the side of a grade school library. And what I would think of when I'm trying to work through what am I actually going to do was what would make it actually a good enough project to do. What would make this fun and interesting and compelling. And those things would always wind up being that it would be site-specific. It would be in that place and of that place. It wouldn't feel weird or bad. It wouldn't get uglier the longer you looked at it. Mm-hmm. It would get more interesting the longer you looked at it. It would have something to do with the people who are there, who go into that space. And so one of the things I did was a series of murals in the Dundee Elementary School that wound up being they asked for 4 trees, and so it wound up being 6 months of me painting trees and landscapes and stuff on all the walls of it, but also working in references to every kid's book that I read to my kids. And then noticing that when I would make a reference to a book, all the copies of that book would get checked out by the kids in that school, because it was this incredibly powerful marketing tool, it turned out.
Yeah.
And so kind of realizing that the way you make something or where you put it can have a real effect. Fast forward a few years, I get these abandoned, condemned homes from in North Omaha from Habitat for Humanity. And the best way I can think of to use them is...
How do you get these homes? What do you mean? I get these homes.
Yeah, I know.
Habitat for Humanity. What do you mean?
It is really funny the way that things sort of happen in Omaha in a way that I would not have anticipated them being able to happen in other places, like in Chicago, where you sort of anticipate that there would be too much red tape, or people would not be able to see immediately what Habitat Humanity in Chicago would possibly get out of collaborating with me. But I knew the executive director of Habitat for Humanity Omaha through a Leadership Omaha program that runs through the chamber. And we went out to coffee one time because I am very involved in a lot of nonprofits in town. Particularly, she wanted to talk to me about the Union for Contemporary Art, which is located, their headquarters are just down the street from Habitat. And we were talking about doing a mural program in North Omaha. And she was talking to me and getting very excited about it. And then she was saying that they have 60 of these homes on their books, and they don't have the money to demolish them. So they just sit in these neighborhoods for years and years, because it turns out it costs $12,000 for them to demolish the home that they own.
For people that don't know what Habitat for Humanity is, it's a great organization that works with people and that can't afford housing, and they build these homes.
And it's so cool.
And the people that are going to live in those homes have to put little elbow
Yeah.
grease in and make an effort.
It's great.
They help
Yeah.
build it themselves, and
Yeah.
and it's to rejuvenate communities, and it's to affordable housing for low income people, and
Right.
it's been around. And it's probably all over the world. I know it's all over the country.
Yeah.
And
I think they have to put in 400 hours of work building the home that they are going to get a loan to live in the community. So like they become these incredibly active, good neighbors. At the same time, they're building this real equity in the community that they move into. It's really great.
I've helped build a Habitat for Humanity house.
Oh, yeah?
And I have no skills. I have no skills. So I basically just spend the time moving plywood around and stuff, because otherwise I couldn't do it. But it was a great experience, because it was a lot of great people trying to help somebody out.
Yeah.
And that so you friends with Habitat for Humanity leader, and they can't afford to tear down these houses.
Right, because it costs so much, and that was one of the things that was really surprising to me, like how these homes that once were really nice, that have turned into a blight on this neighborhood. Like anybody who is related to them in any way suffers because of it. Like if you live near it. I would go up and I would interview the people who live in that neighborhood, who live nearby. Basically, anybody who would stick their head out the door, I would walk over to them and try to get them to talk to me on my cell phone, which a surprising number of people would. And they would tell stories about it being all these urban legends of it being a crack house or a den of prostitution, or that time when the police came and there's that girl that was being held prisoner in the basement. And none of those things were, actually true when you went in the house, but it still affected them as if it was true. They still thought they lived next to a crack house. So I would go up and interview them. I'll make paintings based on the stories that I get out of them and what I find in the house, and what any kind of stories that I can pull out of the community that are related to those homes and the lives that those homes had. And then I make paintings based on those and install them in every window of the house, so that you walk around the house and you look in the windows and you see something going on, some stories of the people who used to live there. And any place that I can, I get the people in the neighborhood or the former residents who told me the stories to model for them, to act them out. And then I take material out of the house, wood, doors, cabinetry, stuff like that, and I make functional kind of sculptural tables and benches and stuff like that out of it. And then I set that up in the community and do a series of kind of community engagement activities, conversation potlucks and stuff like that.
So you're trying to beautify a really ugly neighborhood. Could that be that's oversimplification?
The ambition. This is one of the weird things, because the ambition of art is often a bit outside of its grasp. And that's definitely what I'm trying to do. What I really aspire to do is to do something beautiful and elegant and completely unexpected in a community that does not get things like this. And they don't expect to have nice things in a way. And in a community where the trajectory of that community has been downhill over a long period of time. And people don't necessarily think that living in that neighborhood or that community is good for them. That by doing this thing, that you shake up the patterns that people have, and that in shaking it up, something a little bit better comes out.
No, you're this white guy in an African American neighborhood predominantly
it's a little mixed, but mostly.
Yeah, and you're going in there and you're saying, "Hi there, I want to paint houses and tell stories."
Yep.
And their response was,
it's largely. I mean, it's actually it's been really positive. Everybody I've talked to has reacted really positively. I mean, I think that part of it is that it's clear that I'm telling their stories. Like I'm wanting to take whatever they can tell me and tell it as beautifully and elegantly and as loudly as I possibly can, so that when I go and talk to them, I ask them a few questions about themselves, and then I just let them talk. And if they say something that I find intriguing, I will ask more questions about it, because I genuinely want to know what they have.
So once you hear these stories, what do you do with them?
Well, I record them on my phone for the most part, and then I put them on my computer and look them over a few times. And then out of what they have said, there'll be a few ideas that are more succinct than others, or more clearer, or more beautiful, or something will be compelling about it. And then naturally, as I'm doing that, I will be thinking of ideas, or there will be images that are popping up. For these, I also always start with you're looking through the window into that room. So I have the structure of that room, which then, if it's a living room, you have these stories that happen in the living room. So you can start to ask yourself the prompts where it feels a little bit like I'm writing a short story for each painting.
But these paintings are all on the outside of the house, right? You're not doing anything on the inside, because I would imagine they're abandoned.
They're pretty nasty.
Yeah.
So I make the paintings in my studio on paper. I take those paintings and scan them, and then enlarge them to the size of the window. So they're about 1/4 the size of the windows. A lot of the windows will be 3 feet by 5 or 6 feet. So the paintings I'll make in the studio will be 1.5 feet by 3 feet. And then I print them on vinyl and glue that to a sheet of plywood, and then board up the house from the inside, so that I'm using the window itself as the frame of the painting, but the house is more secure than what it was when I found it.
Okay, so now, how are they responding to this?
So the first house was really strong. It was really positive. We went and installed it. There wasn't really any fanfare beforehand. We installed it, and then we started having events where I would just go up there and talk and put it out on Facebook or something like that. And we'd wind up getting 75, 80 people show up. It was last winter in 24th and Emmett. And all these people from the neighborhood would also just sort of walk over. There's something going on. The Habitat for Humanity people are giving out hot chocolate or whatever it is. And they would walk around and they would look at it and be so surprised that something like this is happening in their community. And for a lot of these people, they've never been to a gallery, they've never been to a museum. They don't really have any first-person experience with this stuff. And what they do have is the idea of art in this way, art that's clearly art, not just like a thing a person made, is people who don't look like them, or people whose stories are not like their stories. And so seeing people they knew, actually literally seeing themselves for a lot of them, I think was a really empowering thing. So that the people who initially told me these stories about how horrible it is, being around this thing or living near it, were complaining pretty loudly that it was going to get taken down. We made benches out of the material, from the house, all this abandoned things that had no value at all. That, like, if you lived near it, it was a terrible thing. If you owned it, it was a terrible thing. If you used to live in it, it's an embarrassing thing. So we made these benches and we set them in concrete in the yard. And I went up one day to lead one of these talks, and one of the benches was gone. And I was like, oh man. And even at the moment, I was like, oh man, someone stole a bench that I made out of the trash of the house. Yeah. I wanted to have this experience of finding value where there was no value, and somebody coveted it and wanted it. And we found it about 4 houses away because it was set in concrete. That thing was heavy.
Yeah.
And it hadn't been damaged. People who had taken it took it by hand and were careful with it until it got too heavy to keep carrying. So that it wasn't even an act of vandalism as much as it was it was a theft. It was an act of coveting.
Do you think the neighbors and maybe the children in the neighborhood do they get your concept here of things that appear to have no value really do have value? Are they seeing that? Oh, look, you took that trash, you made it into a bench, or you made it into something
I think
useful.
They're seeing that, and I think that like I put words to it that they wouldn't necessarily put to it. I can talk about it, conceptually in a way that they wouldn't necessarily have language for or say about, especially the kids. But I think it's also I strive for a thing that you kind of get inherently. You look at it and you see that there's this clearly falling apart home that is a blight, is ugly, is it looks dangerous, and it suddenly becomes a site of something that feels very personal to you, that feels very beautiful and active, and the shock and surprise of those two things happening so close together, I think really, people get
and there's no animosity, there's no problem because you're an outsider.
No, not really. Well, at least there haven't been so far. They're in the not really. I think that there is something about there is a natural reticence, I think, to believe people, especially believe people who are from outside your community coming in, especially the idea of an affluent white guy coming into a black community and doing something grand to make their life better, something very paternalistic. And I think that I sidestep that a bit by acknowledging that I don't have the answers to anything, and that what I'm wanting to do is something very kind of understandable for anybody who wants to participate. And I want to facilitate making it about them.
Have you always had this sense of responsibility as an artist to give back to the community, or this is something you just sort of fell into?
One of my really strong mentors in Chicago was a guy named Jim Degnan, who I watched and sort of collaborated with and saw him do this kind of work. And I saw myself as a different kind of artist. I didn't think that, I didn't think I was a teacher. I didn't think I could work with kids. I didn't think that I could go out into a community and would be taken seriously, or God forbid, think I could, sort of shift the impression or feeling of a neighborhood. And I saw him do that a lot. And then when I left Chicago, as mentors often seem to do, they sort of stick in your head. And then when you are posed with a question, the best answers you come up with often have like a bit of their voice in it. And so it was often that if I was going to work in a community, I would notice that it would make the project better if I was going to have a person in it, to have that be a real person, and have that real person be from this neighborhood, and have the fact that person from this neighborhood gives that person a little bit of an ownership over the site of this building. So who do you want to give that ownership to? The person who owns the building already owns the building, so why not give it to somebody who doesn't? Maybe you give it to somebody who isn't going to necessarily expect that they get such a prize. And then you've sort of given this great thing to someone who didn't expect it.
Now your project is called
All That Ever Was, Always Is.
And you need some money for this, right? I
do.
Yeah,
I do.
Although, like you said, Habitat Humanity doesn't have the money to tear down the houses.
They certainly don't have the money to
supply you with the paint and the supplies to...
Well, they actually do a lot of great donations of in-kind donations. So they supply talent when we need people to come and take off doors and windows and siding, stuff like that. They supply materials when they can, but not a whole lot of actual fundraising. We've received 2 grants for this project. One from the Mid-America Arts Alliance in Kansas City gave us an Artistic Innovations grant, which was a major grant. And we just received funding from the Nebraska Humanities Council just yesterday, I think.
And, okay, so if somebody wanted to contribute to something like this, how would they go about doing it?
Oh, well, that would be great. I'm doing a crowdsourcing campaign through hatchfund.org, which works exactly like Kickstarter, except it's actually a nonprofit and it's located here in Omaha. They can also, so they can go to that website, search for my name, Watie, Watie, and they'll find there's only one of me on that site.
Yeah.
There's usually only one of me. They can contact me directly through Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. And if they are so interested and want to contact me, I'd love to have a conversation with them and have them come over to the studio.
You did say there's only one Watie.
There is.
It is a unique name. Any story behind that?
There is a story behind that. So I am named after a distant relative of mine named Stan Watie, who was a Cherokee general in the Confederate Army. It's a bit of a dubious lineage. He was, he was in the Confederate Army. He was not on what I would think was my side. He was the last general to surrender. And he also signed the.
Now, was that because he was a strong fighter, or just really was just more
stubborn,
or just always put things off?
He has a really hard time, acknowledging any errors he made. He also signed the treaty with Andrew Jackson that sent the Cherokee on the Trail of Tears, even though he didn't really have any authority to speak for the Cherokee Nation. So it's a little dubious. But it's a Cherokee name. It means war paint.
War paint. That's very cool. In a way, that's sort of what you're doing here.
A little bit, yeah.
All right, thank you, Watie. Interesting story from an interesting man, an exceptional man here on TomBecka.com. Not only are we on TomBecka.com, but of course you can get this on YouTube, iTunes, get this on the TuneIn Radio app, the OO-Tunes app. Yes, so many different ways that you can enjoy and share the stories here. And if you like what we're doing, would you please share the stories? Tell your friends, spread the word, put it on your social media. Every week there's a new and interesting person here. Every week there's a new story to tell from someone that may have a story either completely or similar to yours or completely different than yours. I appreciate you joining us. Thanks for being a part of the community here on TomBecka.com.